This guide will show you how to reduce the amount of injuries you get with 30, 40, 50 and even 60%. Whenever a new version of FM is released, the forums, the Reddits, the Steam groups, everywhere people are spamming about injuries. This game is unrealistic, I'm getting injuries, so and so many injuries, please fix it. Well, injuries can certainly be annoying, especially when they happen to one of your key players or your most promising youth prospect. What I'm going to show you here, I recorded in FM21, the current version, but I'm sure it will work in future versions because I know it worked in previous versions. No matter what version of Football Manager you're using, this guide is relevant for you. So, let's take a look here at my current Football Manager 21 save, where I'm the manager of AC Milan. We are in May, which means we are late into the first season. It's almost about to come to an end. And as you can tell, we have seen a 37% decrease in injuries so far this season, compared to what we could expect on average. And we're currently in 18th position in the injury table. So almost all the other clubs in the league have more injuries than we have. Now I'm pretty slow when it comes to playing FM, so this is only my first season in Football Manager 21, but just to show you how well this works, I'm going to show you how it looked in my main save back in FM 20. So the first season, at the end of it, we have seen a 64% decrease in injuries. Second season, we have seen a 50% decrease in injuries. And the third season, we have seen a 62% decrease in injuries. So I'm pretty sure you believe me now, this works, we're going to reduce the amount of injuries. But you may ask, so what's the secret? How do you reduce the amount of injuries with these insane numbers? Well, it's actually not a big secret. It's more or less common sense, and yet so few people use it. Yet the forums are flooded with people complaining about injuries. So first off, we have this screen right in front of us right now, the medical center. And this screen actually more or less gives us everything we need to know on how to reduce injuries. We can tell that there are a few different things that increases the risk of injuries. So we have a match load, we have training load, we have injury susceptibility, we have fatigue, and we have match sharpness. And all of these combined gives us an overall risk. Let's start with injury susceptibility. So some of your players will have a bigger risk of getting injured than others. If we take a look at some of my players, we can go to Millicare, for example, go to report, coach report, and you will tell that injury proneness, fairly susceptible to injuries. And the list goes on. We can check out Conti, fairly susceptible to injuries. And Castillejo, injury prone. And Duarte, injury prone. Players that are injury prone have an increased risk of injuries, and in some cases a much higher. You don't know for certain how big the risk is. This game actually uses a hidden scale between 1 to 20, where 1 is the lowest possible risk, this player will very rarely get injured, and 20 a very high risk, where the player will get injured often. But of course there's a bit of an RNG, and even a player with a 1 could get injured, and a player with a 20 could stay injured free for some time. But if I look at my players, just this season, Milik picked up a 1 month injury. Conte's been injured 2 and 3 times with a few weeks each time and so on. So having these players drastically increases the amount of injuries you see over the season. And this is probably the main factor where I only have 37% decrease this season compared to in FM20 when I saw 50, 60, 65%. If I didn't have all those injury prone players, this number would probably be much higher. And that's actually a solution to get less injuries. What I do in the long run in my saves is that I more or less get rid of all the injury prone players. Now this is the first season of the save. I haven't had time for anything like that. But in the long run, over 2, 3, 4, 5 seasons, most likely all of these players will be sold. It can sound harsh just selling off injury-prone players, especially if they are really good, but imagine how much easier it will become for you in the long run to win the league, to win Champions League, and so on if you get 50-60% less injuries. What I do is that if they are really injury-prone, injured all the time, I usually try to sell them ASAP. But if there are, for example, a youth prospect with a really good talent, I might try to develop them for a few seasons, see what happens. And if it's a very good, important player, I might keep them on until I get like an offer too good to refuse for another club. So not drastically, but over time I try to ship away all my injury-prone players. Next one we have is training load. And training is something that is often kind of forgotten in Football Manager. A lot of people just set their assistant manager to handle all the training and forget about it. And it's okay to play that. It might not be the best or most optimal way, but it's definitely a way that some people like to play it. And this won't be a training guide. If I did a training guide, this video will be like 30 plus minutes longer. So I'm just going to talk about a few things when it comes to training and injuries. And the training load is what increases injuries. And you can tell by just hovering over intensity here. You can see how it affects the injury risk for different days here on my schedule. And of course, match day is the one with the highest intensity. And you can change a lot of things around here manually. You can change on what you're going to focus on. You can check. You can even set individual training passes. You can, for example, give more rest. If your player is having a very high training load, maybe they need more rest, or maybe they need a day off after a match game. And good advice here is that sometimes during a season, especially if you're in a lot of cups, you can get an extremely tough schedule. For example, in this save, I had during 1 month 10 games. That's more or less a game every third day. So what I did do was I reduced the training load to compensate for a higher match load. And you could even do this on an individual level. For example, one of my injury-prone players here, Conte, I could, if I wanted to, just give him a lower intensity. Or a higher if I have a player that's not injury-prone. Maybe somebody that's think the training load is a little bit too low or something like that. But as I said, this is not a training guide, but I think I'm giving you ideas how you can experiment with training to reduce the training load. So what we have left here now is match load, it's fatigue, and it is match sharpness. And all of these ones will kind of be summarized in the next step. So if you look at your squad, there's a bunch of different views. You have the general info, you have the selection info, and so on. The one that could be a little bit extra interest is the risk assessment, but I just want to mention it's also a injury view. If you have any current injuries, you will get information about them. But the risk assessments tells you can see all the things that we had in the medical center. We have them here with match load, training load, and so on. You can use this when you pick your squad for a game, who will play, who will not play. And you can also, as I have done, create a costume view, where in my case I focus on the match sharpness and the overall injury risk, because I don't have room here to add all of the different factors, so just get the overall risk. And you can do the same when it comes to picking your squad. This is the default selection info, but you can go for fitness, and of course you can do as I've done and created a costume view for when I pick it, when I once again have the injury risk here. By the way, if you want to know more about how to create costume views, leave a comment below, because if there is an interest for it, I may do a video tutorial on costume views. But what I do here is that I try to never pick players with high injury risk. Now, if you want to do this even more detailed, you could go for players with high match load. But I feel like it's not that important. It's the overall risk that matters. As an example, you could have a player with a high match load, but with a light training load, and it could be okay. So I try to just, as much as I can, never start a player with a high injury risk. So my goal is more or less to have 2 players for each position, so they can rotate heavily. That means that even if I was the Barcelona manager and Messi had a high injury risk, I would rest Messi. And that's crazy. Some people probably say you can't bench Messi. Well, I can, because that means he won't get injured, so he can play more games for me in the long run. But then you can, of course, be very smart with your rotation. And if you have a much stronger player like Messi, you could focus so he is playing all the important games, and then you have the weaker option that plays the easier games. One thing that I often do when I start new saves, when I don't have like two equally good players for each position, is that I have my main option and then I have a promising youth prospect. And the main option, he starts all the important games, all the tougher games, but for all the easier ones, like easier cup games, and of course for all the easier at home games, I use the youth players, which will help his development and will reduce the better players' risk of injuries. And I would say, but of everything that I've shown in this video this far, this is by far the most important thing. By doing this, by trying to, as rarely as often, start player with a high injury risk. As often as possible, I go with player with low risk, and if I need to, I go with players with increased risk. This is by far the most important reason that I am getting so few injuries. Well, let's just bring up a special thing here with Conte with his increased injury. Because if we go back to the medical center, we can tell that his increased injury risk is because of low match sharpness. And there's only one way to get match sharpness, and that's of course playing matches, which means we need to be playing with a player with increased risk. So what I normally do in this situation is one of two things. Either I let him start, and I try to sub him off early in the second half, or I start him on the bench and I sub him on sometime during the second half. So he gets to play, he starts building match sharpness, and his overall injury risk will go down because of it. So next up is staff. And one thing I noticed that it's easy to forget about is your staff. Because everyone talks about getting the best coaches, the best assistant manager, even getting good scouts. But you very rarely see people talk about the medical team. What's the best physios? The medical team helps you preventing injuries. And now, this medical team might not be a great example. This is my first season. I haven't had the time, and more importantly, I haven't had the money, because we are dirt poor, to build a really good medical team. Definitely something I will focus on in the future. But if we click a physio here, and we read what physiotherapy actually says, it says that it reflects how good they are on preventing injuries. And not only preventing them, also rehabilitate if they have an injury. But the thing we're after now is, of course, to prevent injuries. So you really, really want to make sure that you have good physios to reduce the risk of your players getting injured. If you follow all the steps that I've shown in this video, I will guarantee you will see a big drop in injuries if you haven't been doing this before. But of course, there's always RNG involved. You will still get injuries. Some will be really bad and probably on your best player, because this is Football Manager. But overall, if you look at the bigger picture over a couple of seasons, you should be getting far less injuries. Now, did I miss anything that could help you reduce the amount of injuries? Let me know in the comment section below. And of course, if you found this guide helpful, press that like button. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more FM21 content. Thank you for watching.